When Argonaut died in the early 2000s, I bought the rights to all the Argonaut IP from the administrator, both to protect it, but also because I knew someday I'm going to want to revisit these and let a new audience try them and play them. And that took a long time. This was, 20-something years ago since Argonaut died and has now been resurrected. I knew that Croc would be the special one that we wanted to revisit. And there's a couple of others as well. Starglider, for instance, one day I will revisit. Most of the Argonaut catalogue, maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't, but Croc and Starglider were like very dear to my heart, and I wanted them to come back in some form in the future, and 20-something years later we're doing that. I think that there's no mystery that if you own your IP and you control your own destiny, then that's worth something. It's worth something for the success of the company. It's worth something for being able to do sequels and spin-offs and everything else. So it's key that we have our own IP and that it's successful. And as soon as we released Croc and we could see that it was successful and that it was hitting the mark, and it was also appealing to parts of the audience that weren't always available to us. For instance, Croc was actually popular with women as well as men, and at the time most, or should I say girls and boys, but at the time most games were aimed at boys and very few games appealed to girls too. So Croc was very important for us in that regard. PlayStation 1 was 320 by 200 resolution. Pretty blocky by today's standards, but the good thing is the new retro Croc can run in any resolution, and so it actually looks more rounded, a more softer an image, because it's taking advantage of what the platforms can do today. With the level of technology that we had back then, 30 years ago when PlayStation 1 was running Croc, that looked amazing. It looked like state of the art. But since then, platforms have increased in power and games have increased in complexity and particularly visual fidelity. And when people see Croc again today, I think it will bring back warm and fuzzy memories for what it used to be like, but also it is enhanced. It is taking advantage of some of the capabilities that we can do today that we couldn't do back then, but it also still very much looks like the Croc of 30 years ago. And also the way games play, it hasn't changed much over the years. The games might look better, they might take 100 or 200 people to make now instead of 30 people. But the way games play is fundamental to the game, and Croc plays as well today as it ever did. I think that Croc is universal because the stories are lovable, the characters are non-threatening and very enticing. The worlds are colourful, and the gameplay is really pure and fun. And maybe a lot of games these days are shoot everything in sight, and it's very different back then. And so the game of Croc is kind of a pure fun game, and harmless and yet extremely fun and enjoyable. I didn't leak it to purposely do anything. I'm just a very open book, much to some people's annoyance. And I was excited by the idea, and finally Croc was going to be remade. And I just couldn't wait to tell people. And I also didn't think it would be that much harm to leak that Croc was in development. It's not saying when it's going to come out. It's not saying who's doing it or what it's going to be, but just to leak that Croc is coming back. That was all I wanted to do, and it did generate a lot more interest than I thought it would, and a lot more PR, and it caused the strategic marketing guys in the new Argonaut to have some kittens, because wow, this is about a year or so before we want to announce it. But on the other hand, it actually brought a few people to the table that we didn't know about. Some people have been able to join and help us on the way that we wouldn't have found if it wasn't out there that we were working on it.
Let me start with the truism that the best games are the ones developed by a team that are trying to develop a game that they want to play. I think all of us who worked on Croc feel that Croc is our favorite game. So I'm a good subject for this. What do I feel when I see Croc up again? I feel joyous. I love that music. It's a brainworm. It's so much fun. I love it running through my head. And that fun gameplay with all those bright colors, it's both a reminder of a really happy time and challenging time in my life, but also it's, visiting old friends and old places. A lot of it's quite funny. I mean, when you jump into the water, when you have those little footprints in the sand, in the snow, those big horizontal wheels, every time I come back to them, it's kind of a joyous, happy place. Part of the magic of Croc was that non-game players could pick it up and succeed. Things weren't thrown at you too fast. You could plod your way around if you weren't very good at games, and get into games for the first time. But if you're a real gamer with tremendous skills, it was also challenging, and you could go whipping through that game at all sorts of speeds, still delighted by the surprises and the wit with which it was developed. I think people who come to Croc for the first time will fall into two categories. Those with huge expectations of what a game is supposed to be like, loud music, a lot of death. They might not take to it. But historically, even those hardcore gamers, along with the ones who approached it with no expectation, were pretty quickly charmed by the beauty, the wit, and the fun gameplay that they found. So I'm optimistic that it'll get a pretty wide audience, both from those used to much more hardcore games and for those that are maybe coming to gaming with less experience. So when I was developing Croc, I played it a lot. I mean, after a full day at the office, I would go test it at night. And I sometimes got home sort of late. I had a small daughter then. I think she was 5 or 6 years old. And I remember one weekend, Croc is on a track mode. And my little 5-year-old daughter is having an earnest conversation with Croc. She's saying, "Why do you keep my dad at the office so long? Why don't you let him come home?" And she would also dance around with him, doing that funny noise. Yeah, we had a lot of confidence in each other in the inner team, and we really tried to accommodate each other. Some people were incredibly resourceful. One incident I remember is near the end of the project, we were short an artist. We absolutely needed a new first-rate artist. And there weren't any in the company of that caliber, and there weren't any we could find by going through local headhunters. One day, one of our lead programmers didn't come to the office, which kind of surprised me. He never missed a day, Tony. The next day he was back, and there was an artist sitting there working. I was a little surprised because we have a whole hiring process and all. And I asked him, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm Mick. I'm a friend of Tony's." And it turns out Tony had driven up to the north of England, picked up his old friend who was suddenly available, brought him down, put him to work, and he was part of the team. Now, given the level of trust between us, this went down real smooth. Although I did point out, you're not supposed to make a habit of this. He says, "No, it was very special." But these were the sort of things that made it all come together. That we didn't stand on ceremony. We did what we could to get it out. Oh, Croc was a huge moment for me. I think it was a huge moment for everyone in the team and the company. The history of Argonaut was it had some huge high points early on. Star Glider, Star Fox, just amazing stuff. And then they went through a less hot period where they'd grown a lot and they were trying to get through the growing pains. And Croc was the turning point for the company back on a big upswing. It's when we regained our mojo, we regained our reputation, it fixed a lot of our finances, made us a quite healthy financial company. It was a huge moment for all of us. Beyond that, it's one of the few times that a team actually worked. We had these incredibly talented programmers. Tony and Lloyd were the two leads. But they knew a lot about gameplay and art. And we let them speak up. We had a tremendous designer, Nick. He had a lot of feeling about how the game should be put together, including the art, and had a lot of input on the program. We had level designers, the way that everybody would not stay in their lane and they would interact with each other, and the team worked. That's what's so amazing. Usually when you give people free rein to comment and discuss, well, it ends up being a little chaotic and not necessarily collaborative. In this case, it was tense, it was hard, we were really working against schedule, there were a lot of opinions, but we ended up with a fantastic product.
I'm Jez Sam. I founded Argonaut a long time ago, and I was keen to do a 3D platform game, and Croc ended up being that 3D platform game.
I'm John Edelson. Jez brought me in the beginning of 1996 to run the company as general manager, and he steered me towards Croc as the great game that was going on in the studio. So I got deeply involved in it, both as executive producer and pretty hands-on.
Argonaut was a small company of 10 to 15 developers, and then we signed this deal with Nintendo, which enabled Nintendo to learn how to build 3D games. And so we would spend time teaching Nintendo 3D. You know, we held lessons in Japan, and we had our team members living inside Nintendo's offices in Japan. And we did a few games for them, Star Fox being the biggest one. And we invented the 3D chip, the Super FX chip for them. And after those 3 games, we pitched the idea of doing a 3D platform game to Nintendo. And at the time, it was the Yoshi character, not the Croc character. When Nintendo passed on it and basically said, no, Yoshi's ours, we're going to do that. That was when we thought, well, we still want to do a 3D platform game, so we had to invent a whole new world and new characters, and Croc was born. The dynamics of Argonaut were that for a while we were exclusive to Nintendo. So the deal we had with them was, you're going to do 3 games for us and teach us 3D technology. And during that time, they didn't say you must be exclusive, but what they did say was, if you want to do anything else, you must give us first option and last matching right, which basically meant we were exclusive to Nintendo. And so we had to wait till the 3 games were up before we could do anything else. And it was at that point we told Nintendo, we want to do other things, we want to work on other platforms, the PlayStation, for instance. And that was kind of when we parted company, because Nintendo didn't want to continue with us on a non-exclusive basis. After we moved away from the concept of the Yoshi racing game, which was the game we were trying to pitch to Nintendo, we invented the Croc character, who was in a very early form at the time. This was not the Croc that we know and love today. And we had Croc running around a 3D world in a PC game engine. So Croc was the first game that we built that we wanted to own the IP. We didn't want to sell ourselves too early, which is the usual case with publishers, is that you show them an early prototype and they sign it up and then they lock up all the rights and they might even own the copyright on the thing that you created. And with Croc, we wanted to hold the IP. And part of the thing that enabled us to do that was, for the first time, we took outside investment into the company, not into a particular project. And that gave us some financial freedom with which to take more risks. And Croc, we did substantially under our own risk before we signed a deal with anyone. And, you know, as we know, we signed it with Fox. And by the time that we signed it with Fox, Croc was already substantially developed. And so we were able to hold the IP, we were able to get a better deal in terms of the royalty rates than we would normally have got if we signed it early. So it was, you know, the stars aligning in multiple ways. And Croc was the first project that we did that with.
When I joined Argonaut, there were about 100 employees on both the technology and the game side. On the game side, there were maybe 6 games in various stages of development. Croc was by far the largest team and the most promising. They were an amazing collection of talent, both on the technology side, the art side, the user interfaces, testing. It was all there. What was missing was the piece to get the games finished. Once you have a publisher who's willing to spend a lot of money at a certain date, they commit budget to TV and they commit it to the stores. You absolutely have to hit that date. That's make it or blow it. And I was pretty big on, we're going to hit our deadline. So the magic of the Croc development process was, first of all, a collection of amazing talent, a real vision, and building fantastic tools to get going. From then on, where I got deeply involved, a lot of it was keeping the team motivated but there was a hardcore, maybe a half dozen people to whom Croc became their life. These people who were living and breathing the development process, coming in early, staying till late, coming in on the weekends, they're the ones that I heavily rewarded. I listened to constantly. Often they had some idea that they had trouble articulating, but it would take months to do, and I really had to decide whether or not to green light it or not. So it was working very closely with the team and recognizing those that are making the sacrifices to make it happen.
So one of the things we learned when we worked with Nintendo, which was very good for them to learn how to make 3D games and very good for us to learn how to add IP and characters into games. So we both got something significant out of the Nintendo relationship. But one of the things that we learned from the way Nintendo worked was that they didn't schedule up front and they didn't design the games up front. They did lots of playgrounds and test areas and figured out what was fun. And they did that for a long time before they actually designed levels and were able to schedule something. And even then, I don't think Nintendo ever believed in schedules. I think they just, the Peter Molyneux approach to game design, which is it's done when it's done and no one knows in advance. Now, we couldn't afford to do that, being a commercial studio that had deadlines. But even then, there is some playing around you have to do with, open playgrounds and blank pieces of paper effectively till you figure out what works. And especially in a new game genre, you have to figure that out before you design the levels.
One of the reasons that many games aren't any fun is once they become playable, people realize what they should fix. But it's too hard to fix it. They've locked in with all this code. We really focused on develop the tools. If you want something new, don't hack it in there. Put it in the tool chain. And that way, if you wanted to back off it or change it or slightly accelerate it or expand it or apply it in a different place, you had the tool chain in place. The basic rule is the best technology wins, not because the technology matters, but it enables your designers to have real tools to get out something exciting.
So one of the other things that we did in the Croc development, which was new for us and probably new for the industry, was we empowered the designers to actually program. And we did that by creating our own language, the Croc script, which all of the gameplay was written in. And it was relatively simple to program, which allowed designers to actually play with it, tweak it, change the actual interactions of the characters. And they could do that without having to ask a programmer to do it for them, which empowered them to significantly improve the game design.
The bulk of the Croc development was a creative process with a lot of freedom. People would try things. I remember walking down to a local playground one day with a few of the team members, and we looked at the little kids on the playground, on the seesaw, on the swing, on the slide, and talked about why that was so much fun. And I think some of that actually showed up in the game as the Jello bounces.
I recognized early on that Argonaut was a tech shop, and we're very focused on the technology and innovation. And our weak part of the puzzle was we weren't creative enough. So having worked with Nintendo, we learned to be more creative, and we learned to hire the right people to be creative, and also to empower our developers and designers and screenwriters and everyone else involved to actually be as creative as possible. It's not something that comes naturally to me. I'm a tech guy, but I did recognize that we needed to beef up our creative side of the business, and we did. Croc was the one game where we decided to be much more creative and to push the IP.
I think the original design, and they worked for a long time on the concept there were going to be 7 full islands. When I looked at the schedule and I looked at some of the islands, I wasn't convinced they were all going to be that good. And I would ask a few people on the team, which are our best islands, which are our worst islands. And everybody sort of knew which ones the weak ones were going to be. So I said, why don't we not have the weak islands and just fold them into the good islands?
Another thing we learned from working with Nintendo, because we were always about the tech and the 3D, and most of our games were first-person games, not first-person shooters because they didn't really exist at the time, but they were first-person games. And we worked with Nintendo, and Miyamoto always believed the game should be third person, because you should see yourself on the screen and see the impending danger and see something bad happening to you. And so, yet again, Croc was the first game that we built that was a third person game. And, we took what we learned from working with Miyamoto-san and applied it to our own 3D platform game. I think when we started Croc, we knew this was a new category of game and that we were very excited by it, and we felt that we could carve out a new space because no one had done 3D platform games before. But as we progressed, and especially because we'd already pitched it to Nintendo, and Nintendo had said, no, we want to do that ourselves. So at some point we knew Nintendo was going to compete with us, and they had infinitely more resources than we did. And sure enough, Mario 64 came out before Croc had shipped, which was a blow to us because we invented that category. We gave them the idea. We showed them the visuals of how to do it. And in fact, our Yoshi racing game it looked like Mario 64. I mean, it basically, it was a shock to us and a disappointment that they got there first. But of course they were going to. They just had, billions of dollars at their disposal, and we didn't. We were a small shop. But getting there second, but being multi-platform was also good too. And we had to keep going.
The new controller was a last-minute horrible surprise.
Sony had just announced the analog stick, and we had like a week or two to implement it just before we went final. And so we did it, but it wasn't ideal. And, had we had more time, we probably would have made it miles better. And the new Croc Retro Edition, we did significantly improve that. But yeah, it was a challenge to incorporate that at the last minute. But if we didn't, we probably would have missed out.
Remember the mudslides in Croc? They're not there. We had worked on some really cool scenes where Croc was sort of skateboarding around on these little mud flows. They would have been really cool. But we're getting down to the closing strokes on Croc. The clock is ticking. And I consulted with a few people on the team, asked Jez if he would cut my head off. Everyone agreed that, no, that's probably the right call. It is painful. So I announced to the team one day, the mudslides are not going to be in this version of the game. I am so sorry. It jeopardizes the schedule. It's taken up technical resources, art resources, design resources, and test resources we needed for the game. And I remember watching a few of my colleagues just cry, and they hated me. But you got to get the game out. This is what we owe to everyone. And it was a great hit without the mudslides. 30 years later, and I still feel bad about it.
There's always a compromise between scope of the game and quality and deadlines. And you want to keep quality, and in our case, we wanted to keep the deadline. So you have to cut the things that are not ready yet or they're not working yet and focus on the things that are working, that are good, that can ship in time.
So my name is Nick Custworth, and I was the lead designer on Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, and Croc 2. So I joined Argonaut in 1993, and the first game I worked on was Vortex for Super Nintendo with Super FX chip. Croc came, I think we started probably 95. I'd worked on a couple of other things for Argonaut within that time. I'd mentioned Creature Shock Deluxe. There was a Scooby-Doo game. A game that never came out, which was very interesting. But then, so Croc was probably the fourth thing that I'd worked on at Argonaut, and so my introduction to Croc came fairly early on. Jez had obviously demoed the Yoshi demo to Nintendo, and I was working on a project called Creature Shock Deluxe, which was taking the PC game Creature Shock, putting it on the Saturn and putting it on the PlayStation. While we were doing that, Tony and Lewis were working on some tech demos on the Saturn, and that just so happened to be the sort of early days of Croc. There was kind of this very chubby little crocodile running down these kind of snowy pipes, I seem to remember. my memory's not too great on it, but that's when I was first introduced to it. And then when the Creature Shock project ended, we sort of got talking. We had a load of ideas, and we were like, "Do you want to join the team?" And at that point, it was probably only like 3 or 4 people, if that. So my initial focus on the project was to really kind of establish what sort of game we wanted to make. We knew obviously we wanted to be a 3D platformer, but we didn't really know how to make that at all. So a lot of the early discussions with Tony and Lewis were really about what tools do we need to build this game? How are we going to take what's traditionally been a 2D format of video game platformer and turn it into a 3D platformer? And that led to kind of the Croc editor, which was used across a whole bunch of different projects, and also the scripting language that we developed, which again kind of had this lineage. I think it was a conversation I'd had with Dylan during the Star Fox days of how they put that together, and they had a very, very simple scripting language. It was basically machine code. So like a hexadecimal value followed by a hexadecimal value. Then for Creature Shock Deluxe, we kind of took that idea and we kind of took it a level up. So it was more like assembly language. It was, again, very simple. But then for Croc, we developed this scripting language, which was called ASL, Argonaut Scripting Language. And that was far more powerful. That was like a sort of human readable scripting language with which like the vast majority of the game was built in. I think the only thing moving in the game that wasn't scripted in the scripting language was Croc, who was hard coded. So a lot of those early discussions were really about how are we going to build this? And the editor came about because, we were looking at, well, how do you build a 2D platformer? And it's a whole bunch of different tiles. So the thought was, well, why don't we take that, extrapolate it into 3D? So you're basically, instead of building on a flat plane, you're building it within inside a cube. And that's how we'll build our maps. So we effectively, we used to call these sections of the level track pieces or tile pieces. And they slotted together the same way a 2D platform game would be put together, but in 3D within inside this cube. So really a lot of the early days of Croc were how are we going to build this, and what does a 3D platformer actually play like and feel like to play? I remember the idea of a 3D platformer was floated around even during the Super FX times, but the limited amount of polygons that you could push around on the Super FX chip made that kind of like a hard problem to solve. So when the PlayStation and the Saturn came about, it kind of allowed us a little bit more flexibility to think about what that might actually look like as a 3D platformer. But there really was no point of reference. Obviously, games kind of came out a few during the development of Croc, and obviously many after. With Mario 64, of course, being the main one. But we didn't have really any sense of what anybody else was doing at the time. So every single problem that we faced, every single decision that we made was kind of, it felt kind of pioneery. It was the first time we were really tackling some of these problems, even though Argonaut has a great history of doing 3D games. I mean, it barely did any 2D games. It was birthed in 3D. So even with all of that experience within the company, this sort of challenge of trying to translate a 2D platformer into 3D, yeah, it was. I wish I could remember specifics or any eureka moments. I don't think there really were any. It was kind of this gradual process of trial and error and trying different things. And like the camera is a huge part of that. And, we had no real idea how to do a camera for a 3D platformer. And what we had in Croc worked with the control system that we had. But obviously, anybody who's played any more modern platformers, the camera in Croc is really quite primitive. And it was something that when Mario 64 came out, it was kind of like a bit of a shock because they'd kind of solved the camera first time out of the bat. And yeah, it was something that we struggled with a lot on Croc 1 and on Croc 2. Yeah, I mean, looking back on Croc, there is a lot of variety, and there's a lot of different characters in there, and they all do a unique thing, which is really nice. In terms of what we could draw on screen, again, this was kind of a discovery of what the hardware was able to do. We did set a hard limit on the distance of the worlds because anything beyond it, we were running into performance issues. I think the characters were such low polygon counts that actually they weren't the main challenge. The main challenge really was environmental. And I think that the strong designs that Simon Keaton came up with and Peter Day came up with for the enemies and for Croc allowed sort of like really strong silhouettes in in very low numbers of polygons. So really the characters, I don't seem to remember the characters ever being something that limited what we were able to push. It was mainly the world. That's why there's quite a lot of height in the worlds in Croc, because it was draw distance that was our real problem. It was what the camera could see and how far into the distance the camera could see, not so much height. So one of the conscious decisions we had with Croc was that we wanted to build worlds. There are other PlayStation titles out there that kind of played to the strengths of the system, sort of streaming in geometry as you're going down a path, keeping the camera very focused, making sure that everything the camera could see was within a poly limit budget. We didn't really want to do that. We wanted a true open world, and we played to the strengths of the PlayStation in a different way. So whereas something like the Nintendo 64 is brilliant at drawing huge polygons, which is why you can get those vast worlds in Mario 64, the PlayStation was really good at drawing textures, which is why the world of Croc is very textural and there's texture rich. There's a lot of detail in there. It still looks really quite impressive in terms of detail for the amount of textures that are just all over these worlds and making them look really distinct. So we could have possibly taken an approach where we kind of played to the limitations of this sort of draw distance limitation of the PlayStation, but we decided to create more solid, interesting, unique, intricate worlds, and we limited them by containing them to certain dimensions, and then each level you'd go through a door to go into basically the next section of the game, which I think ultimately is part of the charm of the game. We saw it as a limitation at the time, but in talking to people that played the game and loved the game, it's actually something that we really appreciate, because every single room feels like a challenge, and there's like almost a puzzle to solve, or there's something to solve within that room. And once you've done it, you can move on, you go through the door, and it's the next set of challenges there. So what actually we thought was a limitation ended up being kind of a fundamental part of the enjoyment of playing the game, which is really interesting. Yeah, in terms of the world, there was a lot of thought put into them, but ultimately we kind of fell back on some tropes. You know, you've got the kind of the forest world, the ice world, the desert world, and then the castle. But you have to kind of put that in the context of all the other problems that we were trying to solve at the time. And it's like there's certain boundaries on how far you can kind of push things. So we felt this sort of safety in these very distinct worlds that had very distinct palettes. So it was clear when you went from one island to the next that something different was going to be there. And with the ice, the ice still looks really beautiful. And I distinctively remember as well, I think it's in the final boss arena with Baron Dante. There's like a stained glass window, and the light reflects onto the arena floor. And that was all done by hand. That was I remember the day walking in and just seeing it that day. And I think that was Mick that did that. And it was just, whoa, that's a sort of beautiful artistic touch that, you know, is completely faked but looks so convincing. And especially for a PlayStation, it looks brilliant. So looking at the scripting language, it was almost a blueprint for how game engines work now. It was a custom language, a syntax that we created ourselves, but its function was the same way some game engines, for example, use Lua or C#. But what it allowed was designers, programmers, artists to have an idea, code up a simple script, get it in game almost immediately, try things out. And that was the beauty of the whole tool chain, to be honest. The level editor was so quick to try out ideas. You could basically build a whole level in a day. I'd often go home on a night, have an idea, come in the morning, build it, script it, and it would be done the next day. So that obviously took quite a long time into development to get the tools as refined as that, and to get the characters and the enemies and the scripting language and everything up to that point. But once we were running really fast because the tool chain, the pipeline, really allowed us to build everything really fast. So it'd been really interesting to see what would have happened had we stuck with the Croc engine outside of the PlayStation generation. Now, some of it was used. I think the scripting language was used on a number of projects at Argonaut, but it almost feels like this prototype kind of Unity or Unreal engine that we built. And it's like, it would have been very interesting to see what the end game for that would have been had we used it outside of PlayStation games, of which it powered quite a few. I think when people sit down and play the remaster, in a weird way, it's kind of going to be what they remember, because when, you know, the PlayStation seemed like it came from another planet when it first came out, and all of those games, they were just, you know, they blew you away, like playing Wipeout, or even, you know, things like Crash Bandicoot, or like Final Fantasy VII or Metal Gear Solid. I remember seeing Metal Gear Solid for the first time and just being like, this is a film. My jaw drops, you know. You know, you play it now and you see all of the technical limitations of the PlayStation. But with this remaster, this sort of like loving recreation of what we created back in the 90s, it just kind of takes away the stuff that can get in the way of playing, like the polygons popping and like the warping of the textures and things like that, and also like the complication of having to set up some weird way to play it in an emulator or a Mr. FPGA or whatever it is. So I would hope the players that pick it up feel like it was just yesterday, and that's exactly how they remember it. And I spent 10 years at Argonaut, 10 very happy years. It was a great company to work for. Jez was an awesome boss. And Croc was just one of those great projects with tons of creative freedom that you wouldn't get to make probably anywhere else. You know, Jez allowed that environment of creativity, even though Jez is hyper focused on technology. And I know that every now and then he kind of like send me down to some warehouse in Ealing to go look at something that someone's doing. It's like, can you use this in a game? And it's like, I don't know. It's kind of crazy. Or like, I remember him showing me this physics engine demo, and he's like, can we do this in a game? And I'm like, I don't know how would you do it? It's so unpredictable. You know, physics it's like you need repeatability. He was always way, way ahead, looking at things that nobody else was looking at. And, you know, I kind of wish I'd stuck with it a little bit, because like the physics thing really sticks with me. It's like, how did he see before anybody else that physics was just going to be a fundamental part of like 3D games, when everybody else was just still in that mindset of like repeatability, predictability, sort of 2D mindset. So Jez was a real visionary when it came to technology, but also fantastic when it came to allowing space for creativity.
Hi, my name is Scott Butler. I was the lead artist on Croc, Legend of the Gobbos. I was at Argonaut Software for 7.5 years. Yeah, I was on Croc for the entire duration. So I'd worked on a number of games before then, including FX Fighter, Creature Shock. There was a game that never got released, originally called Demolition Dam, which got renamed to Nucleus. Ren and Stimpy as well. King Arthur's World. There's just so many games we worked on. It was a really fun time. Croc started for me in '95, about 5 years into my employment. And my first memories of Croc are being asked to come work on it once FX Fighter wrapped up, and to join as lead artist and to run the team. One of the first meetings we had was what would the collectibles be, which eventually became the crystals in the game. And another one was what would be the objects that we would have to have Croc jump really high, which eventually became the jelly. It was already a crocodile at that point. I believe they'd gone through some exploration of different creatures for the main character. Yeah, my memory of the Gobbos was that to me, they're just like pom-poms. It kind of made me laugh. They were very cute and fluffy. They're very friendly, very sweet looking, and you kind of want to save them. I think Simon Keating had already done a lot of designs by the point I joined. There was kind of a number of concepts that were there. So there was already sort of like a base of what they wanted for the main game. The process of creating the characters that Simon Keating was concepting, from what I saw, it was very, very free. We tried not to set a ceiling with him. We wouldn't sort of say, oh, don't create a character with 8 tentacles or something, right? I'm just making things up, but as an example. But we never like to set a ceiling. And myself as a lead artist, who would always be overseeing concept through the process of 3D modeling and then animation and rigging, and getting the character into game. I never liked, and I still do that today. I don't like to set hard ceilings on things. If it's a really good idea and it really adds to the game, then I think it's worth doing. And I think that's how you break new ground. If you sort of say every character can only be 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head, and it can only use so many polygons, and it can only do so much, then what you end up with is everything looking very similar. Already when I joined on the team on Croc, Simon had already created quite an array of characters that I loved. I mean, they all had a whimsical charm, and they all were fun and sort of cute and weird at the same time. So there were so many to choose from, and I definitely was sort of probably grabbing from the earlier concepts and saying, hey, that character that you did, let's make that the boss, and let's do that. Let's do something with that. But yeah, the process of new stuff was like, Simon, we need a new character, we need a new enemy, an enemy that runs really fast around the environment, and don't worry about how we're going to do it, we'll just figure it out, and then he would sort of create a character that was like this crazy running speedy character, and it was like, all right, I'm going to create a trail thing that's just basically a transparent card with a blur on it, so it looks like it's got motion blur, it's zooming along, but it's obviously not motion blur as we know it today. So Simon was constantly drawing stuff. I think almost every day he came out with like at least a few designs. It was almost a bit dizzying sometimes. You were, because obviously as fast as he could draw something, he could draw another thing 10 minutes later, but it takes us days, weeks to get that implemented. So there was always that kind of sort of issue with like wow, all right, slow down a bit, this is a lot to choose from. One of the big tasks that I had to do joining the team was to figure out how we were going to put the world together. Initially, we weren't too sure what the PlayStation 1 could do, because it was for us a new development kit, it was a new platform, and we weren't sure if we were going to make it sort of like a trench style game, a bit like other games that have come out around that time, like the launch, because then you're focusing all the rendering on sort of a fixed area sort of ahead of you, which can definitely be very performant. And we did that initially. We sort of had like a tunnel kind of environment where you sort of race through and collect stuff. But as we were experimenting, we got a Croc on screen running, on the spot. And then we realized that was running at 60 FPS, which was amazing. And it also was using a bit of skinning. The neck down to the tail and the legs was skinned, and then the arms and the head were parented objects, I believe. I should remember that because I did build him. Yeah, we then put loads more Crocs on screen. I think we had something like 30, 40, 50 Crocs, and it was like, wow, this platform's actually really powerful. So then we started exploring the idea of having more open environments, bigger environments. And we tried an arena, and I came up with a way to do environments that were very efficient and very editable. So I came up with a tiling system of corners, inverse corners, straights, blending from, grass to another terrain and back and forth, and sort of drop-offs and rivers and, things like that, and little cliffs and stuff. So that's when we started to realize that actually we can render something quite substantial. Yeah, well, once we had a lot of stuff running on screen, and we started exploring arenas. The arenas were basically enclosed, right? We eventually got doors and things and stuff like that to sort of extra areas, but we thought, can we render like, I don't know, sort of 16 by 16 tiles? Can we go a bit further? How much can we render? I know the PlayStation was one of the first things that had sort of built-in hardware fogging into the rendering system. So we experimented that a little bit. We sort of pushed a little hard and fast, sort of expanding and expanding. We were constantly adding stuff, and because it was at the conceptual stage, it was early stages of having stuff built, getting the Croc built, getting some enemies built, getting some pickup objects and crates and things like that built. I did the crystals. I did that in 3D Studio and rendered it out spinning around with multiple lights on it as little sprites. And then getting that sort of sprite engine working so you can have things that look like they're, quite polygonal, got a lot of 3D in them, but they're actually a sprite scaling as you move around. We realized that, we can do quite a lot with this platform. We could get particle effects, we could get scrolling textures for like lava and water and things like that. Thinking back to like how that was 27 years ago or 29 years ago when we started in 95. It was pretty, I felt like it was pretty groundbreaking at the time. There were definitely PS1 games that was coming out after that had, pretty big environments, but I feel like we were one of the first. It was really exciting. It was a really great, exploratory game to work on with, a new platform. We'd done 3D games before it, with FX Fighter and some other games, but this was the first time we had a system that, by default in its rendering engine could do so much. The platform was so powerful. It was kind of quite eye-opening, how we started out with what we thought we could do, given sort of limitations of earlier games like FX Fighter. We had sort of probably something like 80 polygons per character to 100 polygons per character. And now being able to do, real-time skinning on Croc and so much 3D in the world, it was I would say it was probably at least 5 to 10x of what we initially thought we could do. I think the early process, and actually I think it continued on in some way, was very open and free. I think Jez really trusted us to make something. We all had experience, a fair amount of experience in making games, and if there were sort of hard and fast deadlines, I wasn't too aware of it. I think he kind of tried to keep us creative and sort of the door was often closed. We're kind of locked in there almost, if you like. I think, at least in my opinion, what I felt like was that our process was like, if we took one of our favorite 2D platformers, which does have a, defined environment, right? You sort of come in here, you go through a bunch of stuff, you come out the other side into the next level, right? What if we kind of took that and then expanded it out this way, right, into a 3D area? And that sort of freedom to create and explore and to figure out what would platforming feel like in 3 dimensions. It wasn't the first 3D platformer, but it was certainly, I think, one of the first platformers to do it the way we did it, which was to really, concentrate on exploration in the game, jumping onto platforms and having platforms move around in 3D. Some of them were going back and forth. And is that easy to jump on? Are you going to miss it? You're going to have problems with perception of depth to landing on things. How does it feel to like jump on a crate and smash it? What with your camera movement, are you able to sort of look around and get a feel for the environment and really kind of feel like you're sort of in there and exploring? And it was wonderful. And I felt like the freedom that we had to create and do that was amazing. In Simon Keating's Croc concepts, there are a lot of ideas that were just never put into Croc, but he was exploring on that side. He was sort of, coming up with ideas and things with visual concepts of like how something might look and, crazy characters and interesting puzzles and elements that you could have. And it was just so much fun to create it. The PlayStation, we always felt like kept up with what we were throwing in there. And it was quite amazing. Yeah, we had a lot of fun doing stuff like that. I mean, even the iterative process of coming up with ways to do things visually on screen that we really couldn't do back in the day in the 90s, as we know it now. I'll give you an example, like the ice bosses with the sort of ice yetis, on the ice rink that had like a mountains and a fence around it. I remember saying to the team, it would be really fun if we could do reflections. Now, when you think like now, 2024 reflections, it's, ray tracing, it's very sort of hardcore rendering engine stuff to do that. And the team just, looked at me like I was crazy. And I says, no, let's grab the environment, all the fences, the mountains and everything. And then let's create a copy of that. Let's de-res it, lower resolution. Let's flip it upside down, tint it all blue with the textures, and then place that underneath the environment. And then instead of having transparency for the ice, you know, the characters running around on, which is very, very expensive on the PlayStation, what we'll do is we'll just create little patches of scratches. Patches of scratches, kind of strange. Sounds very Dr. Seuss. But little kind of like areas of like sort of little details and things that we could copy around, so that the amount of actual rendering on the fill rate of that was very, very minimal. But it gave the sense that there was a flaw. I don't know what the number was, but I would say like a 20% cost, because, you know, we had a bit of extra environment. But because the environment itself around the arena was quite simple compared to some of the other ones, we had sort of that cost, you know, already in there. So it was okay. You know, we couldn't render the characters upside down. I mean, technically we could, but it would have been too many characters on screen. So we didn't really have the Yetis and Croc upside down underneath, unfortunately. But, you know, for PS1 and for early players, you know, you sort of kind of use your imagination and block that in, you know. I feel working at Argonaut, the culture that we had was very sort of sandbox fun. You know, we were all very young, so it was all very early discovery for us. It was, you know, we were big games players. We've been playing games for years. But the way the culture worked at Argonaut, although we were always sort of, you know, having to get games out and make stuff and get deals with publishers, and, you know, because we were just a developer, you know, was always that sort of that little bit of pressure. But I always felt like, even with all that, we felt the company culture was always allowing us to have fun and to make stuff. I just think also mixed in with that time period of, you know, the 90s that I was there from like 90 to 97. It was just a fun time, because that was around when 3D was starting to kind of get off the ground. You know, we'd had 3D games prior to that, some early filled 3D games on the Amiga, obviously wireframe games before that, sort of vector graphics. But you know, we were starting to do stuff that was really kind of catching the eye of not only the players but the industry. You know, having textured 3D, having more stuff on screen than a lot of other developers were doing, and it was just exciting. It was just a fun time of you know, both software and hardware kind of, you know, movement forward, and seeing new things to us that we hadn't necessarily really gotten to see before. It was really, really exciting.
So my name's Jason Smith. I've been making games for 30 years this year, and Croc was the second game I worked on and the first game of mine that shipped. The first game I worked on, actually the reason that I accepted the job at Argonaut originally to work with Jez and the rest of the team, was a game called Hot Ice. It was for Microsoft. It was a really exciting opportunity to work on in 3D animation in games. Back in '94, there weren't many companies doing that, right? And so I think it was seeing the really early technology that Argonaut had both built itself with Brenda, and also the games that they were using it for. For me, that was the decision in me joining the company. It was around similar time when Croc was becoming a concept, and I was friends with Simon Keating, who was the lead character designer on the project, and you know, really kind of the creative force behind the world. Certainly at the initial concept stage, and so I would see his character designs, his sketches, his thoughts coming out on paper, and he was very visual, the way he presented his ideas, and I'm very visual as well, and I just really connected with his characters. So I wanted to be on the project from the beginning, and it was just fortunate for me that at the point that I was moving off of Hot Ice, the previous project, Croc was really just a small team. I think there were maybe 4 or 5 people on. There's a lot of luck involved in these, and in any creative endeavor, particularly team endeavors. And it certainly felt to me like the initial group of people who got together to explore how this could become something, a really cool game experience, and certainly push the bounds of where we were at the time. It felt like a cohesive group. Everything that was being presented out seemed to fit together very nicely. And so, that makes a huge difference when you have designers and visual designers and game designers and people representing the other disciplines of a team really early, and they clearly share a vision, and they're working well together. I think, it was my first experience in the games industry of witnessing that, but also, when it's kind of working. So it was really fortunate for me to kind of come across this core team that were just, beginning to present out these really unified ideas. We were on the cutting edge, certainly. There were other companies that were beginning to explore that space as well at the same time. But we knew we were right at the forefront with them. Largely, as you say, enabled by the technology that Argonaut had and created with Brenda. But I think that and the combination of drive, Jez had kind of created this environment where people could go off and play, and they could go off and fail, and they could experiment. And we weren't micromanaged. We were actually given a lot of creative space to play in. And I actually feel that was incredibly valuable, and a credit to Jez in the way that the teams were set up there, because it allowed us the space we needed to explore and push against what we felt was possible at the time. And to get the opportunity to breathe life into this world, these incredibly creative characters, and explore playing in like a Chuck Jones, Looney Tunes style, heavily influenced animation area, couldn't have been more exciting. So to take all those 2D learnings and bring them into 3D, we were pushing boundaries. I certainly hadn't seen 3D squash and stretch in a game before. And, it was something that I was able to do on the SGI workstation that I was animating on. But at the time, the game engine couldn't do it. It couldn't scale bones. It was, purely rotation based. And the engineers, I think once we'd had a few animations that really showed the benefits of bringing this style into the world, the engineers were amazing. They just jumped on it and made it work. It was more memory. It was obviously a more processor intensive at the time. And so I was throwing hurdles over the fence to the engineers, really. But I think it speaks to the passion and the effort that everybody was bringing to the table to do something different and to move things forward. Nobody said no. But the reason that it connects and it doesn't feel like the game is constrained by anything is because we didn't feel like we were constrained by anything. And I mean, the engineers may feel differently, but they were so determined to make what we needed work, and succeeded in doing so, that from a creative standpoint, we didn't feel constrained. from what I remember about the team, and I do look back favorably on the project as one of the most fun projects I got to work on in the industry. I remember there being around 12 of us in one room for a large portion of the development. And it certainly didn't represent the whole team. You know, audio were off, had their own space and had an enormous contribution to the project. So there are a lot of other people outside that room that really were as much to do with the success as we were. But when I think about the development team inside that room, there were about 12 of us, and I do think the fact that we were a pretty stable team during development really helped. You know, in game development, there's always a risk that, especially an independent developer, that people will be pulled off for other things, or, you know, development could be up and down. It could be wavy if you didn't have the full trust of the publisher, or milestones were missed. You know, there's a lot of external factors that could really negatively impact the final product. And it was very early in my career, but looking back, it did feel, now it felt like, you know, there was some protection around the team. I think, you know, it wasn't just us inside that room that felt that we were getting to work on something really cool and special at the time. I think that was also seen outside, and again, I think it's a credit to the management at Argonaut. It kind of kept us focused, gave us space, and yeah, protected us. We didn't feel the external factors at that point kind of impacting development. There were milestones set, there were schedules, but as I look back, it didn't felt like we were being really corralled into those deadlines above and beyond everything else, or above and beyond the quality of the project. And, you know, maybe that's one of the reasons that it stands out as being such a great project and a great experience at the time, is because it did feel creatively led. And again, I think that's just getting the right balance between the leadership, the producers, and the creative direction in the room. And I don't know how intentional that was to manage it in that way, but that was certainly what we ended up with. It was very evenly balanced. And, you know, we put in the hours. It wasn't like we weren't aware of needing to get things done in time. But I think it's probably a combination of maybe the time in the industry and our age and enthusiasm for what we were doing by everybody in the room, along with the fact that we could iterate pretty quickly, even though they were very rudimentary tools back then comparatively. We kind of built pipelines in so much that we could iterate and improve on things, and feedback. Everybody had the ability to feedback into the game as well. So with a small team, comparatively to now, it's so much quicker to work. And so I think that was one of the great reasons that you could make so much progress so quickly, and maybe one of the reasons that deadlines didn't seem so quite so dictatorial on how you were working. You could, you know, plow through and put the hours in and achieve what you wanted to. It was super exciting at the time, and it felt that just my tackling things in a slightly different way, you could do something that nobody else had done before. And so it was incredibly spacious sandbox for being inventive and feeling like you were getting to push the envelope in different ways. And I know that everybody on the Croc team has stories that are just as interesting where they were doing things that hadn't been done before either. And I think, those, I certainly feel very fortunate to have been in a room with a group of people that were that creative at the time, which were unique. I think fundamentally it was a fun game. It was probably one of the few games that I really enjoyed playing when we were building it. And, so hopefully anybody who picks it up now, whether they played it before or not, that will still come through. That's kind of the best, the biggest gift, right? And that's kind of what you want to hear as somebody who's worked on games, is that people are enjoying it, whether it's for the first time or whether they played it before. So I think, there's always a lot of work that goes on behind remastering and bringing these titles back, even if it's in a way that feels truly authentic to the original. But I think that is a craft in itself, and bringing that back in a way that really honors its past and provides that same original experience, but in a way that works really well on modern hardware, is kind of a perfect scenario. I think it's going to go down well.
My name is Anthony Lloyd, and I was a programmer on Croc. So I was at Argonaut for a while. Before we started Croc, I worked on a few games before that. So when I started on Croc, we actually started it from the very beginning. There was no work at all before that point. The first work we did was on the Saturn. At the very beginning on Croc, there was myself, Lewis Gordon, and Nick Cusworth. When we started, I was not sure what we were sort of planning to do. It was more a case of, like, how do we build like a game that's sort of never been done before? And I think that was one of the difficult things we had to get over, was the fact that nobody's done this. We're not sure how to do it. What do we need to do? It was difficult to start because we didn't have a lot of documentation on, the consoles, how to do what we wanted to do with 3D. We had a demo which showed us how to draw a very simple landscape on the Saturn, and then we moved on to the PlayStation. But we had no tooling really. Argonaut at the time were working on Brenda, so we could use that on PC, which gave us some good visualization of what it would look like. I think that's it. We sort of had to do all the tooling from the very start. No tooling was available, no editors or examples really. Yeah, so when we started, we called it Croc Editor. It wasn't on Windows, it was on PC. From DOS, you started it. You then, to do rapid prototyping of platforms, characters, anything like that, we would write something called strats in something called, I think we call it Argonaut Strategy Language, ASL for short. And that was a very quick way of adding virtually everything in the game to the game, which was quick. Whether it was a great idea long term, it did limit us a little bit of how much we could do, because it wasn't as fast as writing it all in native code, but it it was quick to add levels, add ideas, so we could prototype, gameplay ideas, and then test them. And if they worked, brilliant, they went in the game. If they didn't work, they didn't go on the game. When we came up with the idea for a character, I think we went through a few iterations. We wanted something that was like upright, walked on 2 feet, and was instantly recognizable. The thing I remember is we gave him 1 tooth so we could see which way he was like orientated at any time instead of 2, and a backpack because he looked a bit drab without a backpack. It was just green, like lizard on screen. When we used to try things, we were mindful that it had to work on both the Saturn and the PlayStation. So it did limit us a little bit. Like, we didn't use triangles. A lot of people don't probably know that on Croc 1 or Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, but we only used quads, and the textures had to be really limited because we weren't yet cross platform on the Saturn as well, and it could only do quads, four-sided triangles, four-sided squares, rectangles. I think the team grew not that quickly. I remember we had an animator, then we needed artists, but it was quite a small team at all times. It was never a massive team. In fact, I think we stayed in the room we started in. So the room, I don't know how big it was, but it wasn't a massive room. And maybe at the peak, it had 20 people in it maximum, if that. Well, it was myself and Lewis were lead programmers, I believe. I did the Argonaut strategy language, the editor. Lewis handled a lot of the 3D, the animation system we used for the full motion video. Instead of doing videos, we had streamed in animations. So we didn't, the whole game felt the same. It never, just went to a really high-res video that looked like it was off from DVD. It carried on. You felt like you were still playing the game, and that was important. The way we divided work is, before that, I mostly worked on my own on projects, because it was on the SNES and the Amiga days. It was one programmer did everything, but we could now divide the work between us based on what we were actually good at. So I'd had a lot of experience in writing like assembly, which used instructions to read instruction. It would say move left for 800 units. And I thought, we could use this for our strategy language. And Lewis was really good at 3D, and he'd done a lot of maths at uni and things like that. I never went to university, so I was just good at gameplay as well. So that's how we split that work up. When we didn't know how to do something, if it niggled us for quite a while, you go, maybe I can do that. Get that working somehow. There was a bit of that. The way we went about milestones, I guess we'd call them that now. I don't know if we had that sort of system in place for milestones. Not internally, anyhow. At the start, it was mostly playing around, making the game what we wanted it to be. And then we probably had to... Somebody probably came up with a date and we'd have to hit it. Putting the game together, when it all came together, was probably when we had an idea of how many levels we wanted, or lands. We got all those in place. And I believe the game was really bug-free for a long, long time because of the way we developed it, and with the way we could author the levels. It meant we could very quickly make sure that everything was going to work. I can't remember how we polished everything, but there was a lot of polishing of making sure that You know, there's a lot of secrets in the game. There's a lot of little hidden Easter eggs. Yeah, there's a few secrets. So, you know, I still watch videos thinking, because I can't remember all the secrets, and I watch them on YouTube and everything. I just remember one of the very first ones was, you know, you start the game and there's a platform straight away, and if you jump on it 3 times, stomp on it, you get like a secret level. People find them. I don't know how they found them. It's always baffled me that, because they were so hidden. Croc 1, we had loading levels, but in fact, there was a nice touch that we knew how big the level data was. So Croc used to walk always from the left to right, and he'd always hit the right as it was about to load. Sometimes he had to walk a bit faster, sometimes he walked a bit slower. That's how we did that. We just knew how big the data was, time it perfectly. I think because we used the animation streamed off disk, I think that gave us a lot of space for extra levels and extra textures, because we didn't have to have big movies on the disc. And I think at the time when people, it was the start of the CD-based consoles, people were just gravitating towards lots of full motion video in games. Because we didn't do that, we used it as just storage, apart from music. I believe actually the music was compressed as well. So yeah, even that is, you know, not as big as it would be on a regular CD. I think we used a different format, so that was small. We just had more space for data, so we could use, you know, more levels, more bosses, more characters, more textures. The way we laid out the texture pages on the consoles as well. I think we had 4 texture pages. Like the first one was for probably Croc and Dantini's Gobbos, the stuff we numbers, fonts, and after that would have been level data. So every time we changed the levels, we could have new textures and a good way of managing that. Yeah, set in stone of what we'd do. You know, 1 texture page for the main character, maybe 2 texture pages, and the rest of it for levels. I don't know if Croc actually had any vertical levels as such. I think it was all flat, as in it was all a big 2D grid. I remember in the editor, what we used to do is, it was a bit like on the early like Commodore games, where it'd be like laid out in just a grid fashion, and we'd decide to put what we used to call track pieces. I don't know if you know, people have used that term before. These track pieces would all fit together. You drop one, and if it needed a corner, it'd place that where you needed it. And we could build up entire levels out of these track pieces, which would then just, obviously, because it's you have track piece 0 there, track piece 1, track piece 1 again, track piece 1. You could store those in just a very small array of data for a whole massive level. Croc development was different to a lot of projects at Argonaut at the time, because yes, it was really inclusive, as in what people could do, and because anybody could just start their own little level and play around and just make ideas. They didn't need to get a programmer. They could just I want platform after platform after platform after platform, and before you know it, you've got like just the world's longest platform section in the game, and that's probably on the disc, because somebody we played it and thought that's actually good fun. It was a good way of doing development. I remember being really nice, and there was games after that I worked on that you couldn't really do that. I think until recently, with the new mega engines out there, it's allowing more people to do that these days, which is it's really nice to see that. But yeah, we had tank controls. I remember that. So we were like, because we had built it for a PlayStation standard controller, can't call it PSX, and then they brought out the DualShock. Was it called the DualShock, or when they announced the controller, the PlayStation analog controller? I remember that we were kind of lucky because a lot of the Croc code itself was in C, so changing some of the movement code was much easier than if it was all in the strategy language. I think we had like a special command like called play Croc or something like that. So Croc's little strategy would be, you know, play that and maybe, you know, set the object, do some animations. But I think the big problem for us at that time would be like, how do we like convert everything, but also allow people to, you know, still use the old controllers, because it was brand new and we had to support both, and we couldn't, you know, ruin one for the other. So yeah, we came up with a system that we thought at the time would be, you know, the best we can make it in the limited amount of time we had. I mean, yeah, it's difficult because I don't know if I can't remember if we did proper camera controls on it. Whereas, you know, now there's like a standard that people have come up with, but I don't know if ours adheres to that standard that people are used to today. I don't remember the time where we sort of said, we're done, hands off. I think it was very difficult for us to say, right, stop. Because, and at the time, obviously, when you pressed a disc, it wasn't like today's where you can just download a patch. That disc had to be, that was it. That's what people were getting. There wasn't a version 2. That's it. You go gold, you ship it. I don't know if the Argonaut environment allowed us to do that. I kind of think we just sort of did that. And it was going to be ready when it was ready. I mean, we tried to, yeah, stick to deadlines. And I mean, we used to work a lot of hours. I mean, everybody was there till very late at night. Yeah, sometimes overnight. We did work overnight a fair amount of times. At weekends, we used to do a lot of weekends as well. And we really loved what we was doing. So there'd be a bunch of people in. I don't think we just intentionally just ignore the deadlines. We just wanted it to be really, really good. You know, the best we could make it. And we were really having fun as well. That's the other thing. It was such a fun project to work on. Yeah, but I'm sure somebody would have said at some point, oh, we've got demos. In fact, there was, because I remember there was, on that moment, it would have been on Croc 1. The gold disc, when it was done, we had to get it to Japan. And it was that late that somebody had to get on an aeroplane and take it. Yeah, I can't remember why, like, the age group that we sort of went for. I think it was the games we were playing at the time. We weren't playing like the Wipeouts or those sort of games. I guess we were playing more fun games. Well, not fun, but I don't know the word for it really. Cute. Yeah, the amount of hours. That's right. We were all fairly young, I believe. How old were we? In my 20s. I think we all were. I mean, it's roughly the same age. I'd like to play Croc 1 again, just to see. Especially if, it's now got new controls. Can't wait for that. I'll be able to play it. When you look back, I don't remember there being any problems. I remember it being smooth looking, fast looking, controlling well, animating smoothly. Texture warping wasn't, I can't even remember it. If it did texture warp, I imagine it did. I've watched videos. But in my head, no, it was all smooth. It was like, playing it. The game's now 120 frames a second. It was butter smooth. When they pick it up and play it, they're going to just remember how fun it was. It's going to be like, oh yeah, I remember playing this. I can play it again. What you remember in your head is definitely different to probably if you looked at it now. I don't know how it would compare. It's because of a lot of it's what you remember. For me, I mean, maybe somebody who's never played the original, they picked it up. I think it'll stand up. I believe it's still fun.
My name's Justin Charvona and I was the audio lead on Croc, Legend of the Gobbos. I joined Argonaut in 1992, and I was their first in-house audio guy. And at that point, I'd already been working in the games industry for several years. So I was coming in as a sort of experienced musician, composer, coming in to work on the Super Nintendo titles that they were working on at the time. Yeah, I stayed at Argonaut until it shut down, so I was there for 12 years. I'm guessing that I started work on Croc in '96, because I know that a lot of the music was pretty much ready by '97, in the sort of spring of '97. So I probably started work late '96, and the sort of early Croc was Croc sort of in the first levels of the game. So early days of Croc, that I would see Croc jumping around in his primitive form. The early days of working on Croc were very much leave me to it and I'll see what I can come up with music-wise. There was no specific discussions held that said, you know, this is the route we want to go down. I was very much free to work on it and come up with some ideas and see what fitted. Well, the first thing to say about the actual composition is that there was a team of us writing music. So there were 3 of us in-house working on the project. So the Argonaut audio team was myself and Gwyn and Karen, and also Richard, who was our programmer. So Gwyn was a friend of mine from school, and one of his great accomplishments was that he went to Cambridge and studied music. And so with his extra orchestration skills, we gave him the job of the cutscene music in Croc, which you'll find is much more heavily orchestrated. And that really was, you know, using his skills as best. He also did some of the level music as well. And he's also, I think he plays the guitar on the credits. So whereas I played the bass throughout all the levels. So he's a very accomplished musician and writer. And also Karen, who again has a music degree and a great orchestrator. She helped me write a lot more of the level music, so she was more that side of things, so similar to what I did, similar role. And then obviously Richard, who was our programmer, who, you know, one of the great things that he managed to do was play looped CD music on the PlayStation, which was obviously new to him, new to all of us. And that was one of the important things that we wanted to do, was to make sure that the music, even though it's compressed, would play and just play. And he managed to do that. I remember he spent many hours trying to figure out how to do that, and he did it perfectly. So the quantity of music is sort of equated to the fact that there were 3 people working on it. It wasn't all me, so I'm not going to take all the credit. When we first started, I think we had probably a couple of different styles of level that I remember looking at. That clearly there was a sort of foresty green level, and then there's also the desert style, and those were the 2 sort of distinct styles that I remember I first worked on. And it was really just a case of definitely with the desert style, I was thinking this is sort of South American Latin style. That's something that I'd like to try. And with the foresty green, that was just a sort of non-specific style, just happy, cute, bouncy music. So there wasn't really a strategy. It was more, this is what I feel will work. Let's see what happens. In writing the music, definitely, you know, you're thinking about the fact that this is being played constantly while Croc is on the screen, and he's in a very colourful world with cute little characters jumping around. So, you know, you have to bear that in mind and keep the music up and happy and bouncy. And that's done in a sort of way that doesn't change throughout, even though, yes, you are in a more spooky environment. It's more done using different instruments just to give different feels throughout. So yeah, rather than changing the tone of the game, there is a distinct happy bounciness throughout. There's a few different things that we did to keep the sort of continuity. One is that when I had written some of the themes that you hear throughout, we would really specifically be trying to incorporate them into each tune, whoever was writing. And some of the core instruments that I was using, we would share. So, you know, if I'm using a certain set of instruments and that palette, someone else would also use those same instruments to write music with. They wouldn't suddenly start again and come up with a different set of instruments. So because we had that kind of core set of themes and core instruments, I think that kept the continuity quite well between us. And then people could add in little elements that they'd come up with. So it's sort of sprinkled with each of our individuality. What tends to happen throughout the levels is that you'll hear a theme, and then really what the other versions of the music are they're called what we'd refer to as variations. They're variations of the melody and the arrangement, and maybe they have less instruments in them. They're just really like, there's like a core theme that sets the level, and then the rest of the music is sort of a variety of versions of that theme. One of the things that you have to remember about that era was that we were starting to have CD-based music in games. So there was a definite move into using music that was recorded professionally in studios. And some of the bigger titles were licensing music. So we were very much aware that our competitors may have brilliantly recorded pieces of music in their games. So we had to do something that was getting there using our recording studio and, you know, just generally using a higher quality of instrumentation, which at times means things like hiring in session musicians to play on the themes, just so that we were in really competing better. The team just sort of acknowledged the music as we added it as, yeah, that's cool. So yeah, I don't want to sort of go on record to say there wasn't any great moment that happened. We did incrementally put the music in the game. That's obviously, it wasn't suddenly like we had 20 finished pieces and we gave them all to them and said, what do you think? It was, you know, 1 or 2 a week maybe, I don't know. But so that there wasn't an opportunity for that really to happen. I think we put pieces in and everyone just accepted them and obviously liked them, because there really wasn't anyone saying, we got to change this doesn't fit. That just never happened. So I think that definitely the way it worked was we would produce music and everybody seemed pretty positive about it, and just left us to it because they knew that we were going in the right direction.
My name is David Stalker, and I was at Fox Interactive. I was the producer on Croc, Legend of the Gobbos. I started at Fox in April of 1997, And the first job that I did there was to fly out to Argonaut in the UK and get familiar with the game. I remember reading design documents on the plane out there and met the team and got down and getting nitty-gritty with the game as soon as I landed. Yeah, when I got there, the game was pretty far along, and it had its identity. There was no more kind of like, what is this game? The game really was pretty well established. Most of the levels were there, and it was in a process of tuning and tweaking, fixing bugs mostly. So you could get a really good sense of the game. And the character, the cute characters, the world, everything was just, it really gripped you and just sort of like made it seem like this was a really cool family-friendly product that had some legs. Croc was kind of standing on its own at that point on the PlayStation as being the only really fully 3D world that you could, it was the only really fully 3D platform game. You had other games like Crash Bandicoot, where Crash was essentially on a rail through a 3D environment, and of course Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. But this was something that was largely thought to be unthinkable on the PlayStation. Other 3D games that had come out had been things like Jumping Flash, where you were jumping between these sort of like large isolated island areas in space. And this was a real attempt to have a full 3D environment within the limitations of the PlayStation. As far as I understand it, the Nintendo 64 had far more polygon pushing power and was really designed to be able to create the kind of 3D world that Super Mario 64 did. Whereas the PlayStation, it was really more of a stretch for the PlayStation to be able to do those same kind of things. The design of Croc was definitely conscious of the limitations of the PlayStation while trying to push those limits as far as possible. And so the design concept was to have these sections of gameplay, essentially like 3D rooms that you would walk into, and each room would have its own puzzle, essentially. And you could look around and try and understand what the puzzle was, how you had to finish the task in this section to get to the door that would connect you to the next section. If the PlayStation had no limits, then the world would have been wide open and you would have just moved from section to section naturally. But again, because of the sort of like the polygon limits and the draw distance limits that were limiting things, the team came up with this system of stringing together different rooms to create a larger space. The Croc music was one of the first things that jumped out at you. It was, again, at the time when I started at Fox Interactive, the music was largely done and there was a lot of it. Each level had sort of a slight variation on the theme for that general area. The theme tune is, of course, catchy as heck. All these years later, I still can't get that tune out of my head, and I doubt I ever will. So it's really one of it just all contributes to the cuteness and charm of the character. Just the island setting, the music, the slightly different themes to the music, the instrumentation as you move into an ice world versus the jungle sort of world, and into the castle and things like that. It was all very fitting. And again, there was far more of it than there would be, I think, in many other games. And it was one of the things that we really wanted to push and let players listen to it as a soundtrack as much as just play it. So the time that Croc was under development, controllers were limited to digital up, down, left, right buttons, and that's what the game was developed for. As we got close to release, Sony suddenly announced that they were coming out with the first DualShock analog with 2 analog sticks, and that was very exciting, but it came late in the development of Croc. And of course, that was not something that was going to be bundled with the PlayStation at that point. That was going to be an extra purchase that you would have to make. So while we really wanted to make use of that controller, it's not like we could completely throw out all of the development and base the controls purely on that. So we, within the time that was available, we did our best with like prototype controllers and things like that to actually incorporate that style of control. And now, decades later, of course, that's the standard. Every game system ships with analog controls now, and that's what everybody's used to. So the game will preserve the original controls, but also take advantage of all of those years of experience and allow analog control as well. So I think that's going to be a big step up from the original, while still preserving the original experience for those who want to go back and remember turn left, turn right, go forward, go back. Croc was hugely successful for Fox Interactive at the time when the market, the PlayStation market was still relatively small compared to what it is today. We sold, I think, over 3 million units worldwide. And Sony had a program actually where once you sold a certain, it's kind of like a gold record, platinum record kind of thing. Once you sold a certain amount of units, you were able to get an award as such. And I have a couple of the Croc ones here, which I'll tell you in a minute how I got. This is the original Croc Legend of the Gobbos release. This award was for 250,000 copies manufactured. And then later, again, I don't remember the rules, but after a certain point, you are allowed to release a greatest hits version. And so when Croc came out on greatest hits, we received another award. And this one was for more than 500,000 copies. So there's 750,000 copies there. And these things are enormously heavy. They're on some kind of composite, and this is obviously metal, and I think they must weigh about 10 pounds each. We had them on the wall at Fox, and when Fox was closing down at the 2003, I think it was 2003 or 4, they had nowhere to go. And so as the producer of the game, I decided that I would keep them, and I took care of them and wrapped them up in bubble wrap and kept them in a box until today. So I still have them. And there's a couple of other little mementos that I have here. This was a award that I think is just a ratings award for a magazine that we got, Computer Gaming World, I think it is. Yep, Computer Gaming World gave us 4 stars for Croc. And then I have this Attractive Facts, which is the Parents' Choice Award, which I guess it means that Croc was officially approved by the Parents' Choice organization, which is kind of nice. I mean, again, it was a universal, inoffensive, fun game for the whole family. And then I also have a couple of one-sheets that were just made by Fox to give out to retailers and such, just to demonstrate the success of Croc. I think, again, this was, at this point, we said over 1 million units sold. Croc is a proven seller. And at that point, the claim was that there would be 9 million new PlayStation game consoles sold between now and Christmas. And that was in 1998. So, as I say, a different world, very different numbers from the kind of saturation that we see today of games consoles. If somebody's familiar with Croc from its original release and plays the new version now, I think they will I think it will play like they remember it. I think that their imagination and how they remember the graphics looking and things like that, the upgrades that have been made will come up to that standard. I think if they played the original on an emulator, say, or an old PlayStation, if they happen to have one lying around, on a current TV, I think it would fall far short of their memory. But I think that this new release, again, the music is already high quality. Playing it through a high quality sound system, watching it on a great TV, I think it's going to take somebody right back to that experience, and I think they'll love it.
My name is Paul Provenzano. I was the head of product development for Fox Interactive from its founding in 1995 until around 2000. My first interaction with Croc was probably late 95. One of the great things about Argonaut and of Jez in general, there was always something fascinating he wanted to show you. He had new technology, something really cool. So you'd go there and he'd say, look at this, listen to this, it's 3D sound, or something amazing. It's the nature of Jez, his curiosity, his pursuit of everything. So I was in there and I was taken to a Sega Saturn dev system, and on it there was a blocky character, and he was running around free, but also going through some tunnels, I don't know what they were, wasn't a lot of detail. But the goal was to get it on PlayStation. There was just a shortage of PlayStation dev systems in the office, apparently. And if you think back to that time, seeing that was amazing. We just hadn't seen that before. And obviously, I looked at that and said, okay, this is something new. You've got to get a game designer something connected to this and pitch it to us. Because this is cool. Jez indicated even back then that this was going to be based on an idea they want to hold on to, an original IP, which understandably so. It did present some challenges. For obvious reasons, the reason for a Fox Interactive was to take advantage of the various Fox properties throughout that universe, whether it's the films or TV or whatever. They had book publishing, a whole bunch of things. And we were pretty busy doing that. You got Aliens, you got Simpsons, you got X-Files, you have movies that are coming out. That's our mission. Okay, you've got all these properties, and you take them through the various iterations of media. Is it possible to take something the other way? And so that was the intriguing kind of going forward idea. And it looked like we were going to do pretty well with some of these licenses, which actually weren't licenses, were Fox properties. And maybe we had the ammunition to do that. But it didn't happen immediately. We signed on officially, I believe, almost a year later. And by that time, I forget whether it was a show in the UK or a show in the US like E3, Jez had proposed Croc formally. Now, I'd seen Croc Advance, but this was Croc as a document, as a game design, and we went forward with it. I had hired a producer fresh from the UK, a guy named David Stalker, David had come over to Los Angeles and was sitting in my office, and he said, "Okay, well, what am I doing?" And he said, "You're getting on a plane, you're going over to Argonaut, and you're going to immerse yourself in this game," which he did. The thing about Croc, and the thing about its development, normally in a development, if you're a publisher and you have an existing property, that means you're babysitting that property. That means you're watching out that it looks like the property it came from, that it looks like Bart Simpson, that it is true to the world that it came from. And a lot of your time is doing that, and also worrying about assets and voice and music and things that are all true to the original property. Obviously, with Croc, that wasn't the case. We became more of a sounding board. David became an ally. And by that time, by the time we were signed, we had a rather robust testing system. We had a lot of people in place, so we became a testing center. Also, the unique nature of this team, the talents of the people, the tools they developed, whatever, meant that, in my recollection, compared to a lot of other projects, this was not coming to us with a million bugs. This was not coming to us with the typical problems that are part of the development process. Nobody was doing anything wrong. When you have bugs, you get bugs. But this stuff was coming to us because it was so well thought out, so planned. Their process, the tools they built that allowed them to build, just worked on a level that, it wasn't typical of other projects. So when I say that this was totally the creation of Argonaut, there were a few intrusions. I'm neither here nor to defend, I'm here to acknowledge. There is, in the original manual for PlayStation, a description of the origins of Croc. That document was the creation of our marketing department. We had been working with a writer's assistant for The Simpsons. He wasn't a writer, he was a writer's assistant. Although many writer's assistants become a writer for a show, he was not at the time. He had done some work on another title we did called Virtual Springfield. And the marketing people got a hold of this guy. His name was Neil Alsop. His name still is Neil Alsop. And he wrote The Origins of Croc. I never saw it, and Argonaut never saw it until they saw it in the manual, much to their surprise. I can't say it was true and in line with what was going on in the game. Okay, I can say that. It really wasn't true or in line with what was going on in the game. Late in the game, literally late in the game, it was pointed out that the levels didn't have names. And that it just sort of went from one level to another. And a lot of people comment about the sense of humor of the game and look at the titles of the levels, the titles, how funny they were. Those were basically created overnight over at Argonaut. Said, oh, you want names? There's some names. There was one issue. It cropped up in the last few weeks, and I'm sure other people talk about it. Sony released an analog controller literally a couple of weeks before we were going to ship. And remember, back in those days, there were no patches. There were no downloading an update. When you finished the game, you were done. It was done. And also the game world existed under a certain set of parameters. The most important part of it was Christmas. Most games made most of their income back then at Christmas, which meant you had to get in line for publishing, for manufacturing, from these hardware makers well in advance. If it was August and you were still worrying about, wonder when I'll get finished with the game, well, that was pretty much a guarantee you missed Christmas, which for some companies was a disaster. So understand, when somebody says, hey, we've got this new thing, it's not shipping with the regular PlayStation, but people will have it. Do you support it? Obviously, the decision was made to support it. And every effort was made. It was an admirable effort. I don't think anybody says, oh, this is exactly how we wanted to do it. But honestly, there weren't any good examples of how you were supposed to do it. They literally had handed it in our lap a couple of weeks before we were supposed to be done. Hats off to the Argonaut team. They did it. Now, the remaster of the game builds on decades of refinement of those kind of controls and creates something that's very acceptable to the modern player. But at the time, none of those rules existed. It was just basically, here it is. Here's some documentation. And we still made our date. We still got out for Christmas. And again, it's that team at Argonaut that made it happen. Did we realize we had something special? Yes, we realized we had something special. Did we have an uphill battle in getting that message out? Honestly, yes, we did. And this is more marketing and less development, but it was blatantly obvious. If you think about 3D platform games that were appearing all at once, and a lot of it developed all at once, so it's not like, we knew exactly what everybody else was doing. If you look at Mario and Nintendo, well, Nintendo launched with that on their hardware. If you look at Spyro or Crash Bandicoot, both of those were developed by companies that were eventually part of Sony. And Sony was also pushing a hardware platform. We were not. Their motivations and their ability to promote and market far exceeded our ability to do that. The PlayStation was initially launched, and that's with the big action games. That's where you're showing off the tech. And then you pivot to kids games, to cute games. And that was that point that PlayStation was at. It was very important to have those. That's my opinion. Nintendo, that's what they did. Nintendo was known for those style of games. We still got a fair amount of attention. We still were able to find an audience. The game did really well. It exceeded our expectations. And honestly, that was the dedication, that was the creativity, that was the studio that allowed all of those things to flourish, to allow something so unique to be created. I think if Croc was your favorite game and you approach this remaster, I think a couple of things are going to happen. First of all, you remember your favorites, something you love. You don't remember the flaws. You remember what you loved about it. You don't remember Croc as being, oh, it had limitations on the hardware system. Oh, there was polygon tearing. You remember the game you loved. You don't remember Croc as a low poly character hopping around. You remember playing the box art. I think they will approach the remaster with nostalgia, but they'll also approach it as, this is the game I remember. And they're going to be able to see the same control system, if they want to use, the keypad. But they're also going to see a modern camera and a modern control system that is the evolution of gaming since Croc. And so they're not going to remember the difference. They're going to remember the version they like to play. I think that the reception is going to be warmly welcomed, but I think a lot of people are going to look at it saying, this is the game I loved. What's the big deal? Except that they can play it on modern hardware, except that they'll be able to share it with friends who will look at it with modern eyes and go, yeah, it seems pretty cool. And speaking of those people, for someone that Croc wasn't their favorite game, but they look at it and say, okay, I like these kind of games. And they're going to remember there was a time when games were a lot more just fun. They had a sense of humor about themselves. They had some challenge to them, but they were playful. And whether it's the amazing music or the humor in the game or those sometimes challenging puzzles, I think they're going to look at Croc and they're going to say, this game delivers all those things. And it's going to deliver it in a way that's very acceptable to the modern player. So I think it's going to be well received in the same way it was well received the first go round.
Hi, we're the Living Tombstone. I'm Yoav. Yoav Landau. I started the Living Tombstone in 2011 with the intent of combining music production with being part of internet culture and fandoms.
And I am Sam Haft. I'm the other half of the Living Tombstone, and together we make a fine team.
Yay!
So the reason that TLT makes so much content in gaming is because that's the culture that we belong to ourselves.
Yeah. A lot of it comes from the aspect that Croc, like many nostalgia games from the past, like internet culture likes to like communicate with itself on things that we all grew up with. Because that's kind of what's happening on the internet, is that we all share things that like we feel like we're personally engaged with things that we really care about, but because of the internet it's like, oh, I wasn't the only one who really liked about this by myself, playing on the TV by myself when my mom was in the kitchen and I was like playing PlayStation, playing Croc. So it's like it's much more common than you think, and I think because of it, that's like what we are very much about when it comes to how we go about making music. Is that it's really just about how common it is versus thinking that it's something in solitude you do.
Absolutely. The internet is a place where anything you've ever liked, you can find a community of people who also care about it.
Yeah, exactly. When it comes to what we do in internet culture and Croc, I think it really just has to do with how shared nostalgia is for a lot of people. And I think more beyond the just shared nostalgia, I think it's the fact that the game itself was something that, like, for example, for me, it's like I grew up with the series, with the franchise, like just really enjoying the. I think it's the fact that the main theme of it, like you start the game and it's like, oh my god, the theme is so good. And I know it sounds like, me going like, oh, I love the theme and I just happened to remix it. But in reality, I did, grow up with how the game just entices you, with how it presents itself as a very cheerful game. And then when you start playing it, you hear the characters talking. It's like very like cheapy, kind of like talking to each other. And then the characters are so endearing. Like the characters that Croc tends to interact with all have like their small little personalities, and so it doesn't feel necessarily like a tutorial. It feels like there's like an island of creatures that Croc interacts with, and they're like, you can jump on this thing, and by the way, I'm the king, and it's like very adorable. It almost feels like these aren't just post-it notes or something that tells you how to jump.
It's a shared experience that we all have by ourselves, but we've all had those experiences on our own. And when it comes to Croc, I mean, it was so genre defying as a platformer at the time, and it really, I mean, I think the first time I played Croc was on one of those PlayStation Magazine demo discs, and I just remember thinking like, oh, this doesn't feel like other games I've played before.
So the remix of the theme came to be literally because of how, given how I remember having a very immediate reaction as a kid to hearing it for the first time when I played the game. I remember how, because there's something that's hard to kind of quantify in this day and age, because everything's so easily accessible. You can just watch gameplay footage of a game nowadays, and for me it was more like, I got the CD, I got the game on PlayStation, and now I'm in the trust of the game that my parents got me, and hopefully it's a game that I like, and hopefully it's good. And then you start playing it and it's like the theme catches you immediately, and I'm having a lot of nostalgic reactions to it, because it's just very cheerful, but cheerful in a very like endearing, genuine way. It feels like it also captures because it's like starts you off like, in a very summer setting. The remix was the whole intent of the remix is to see if, without because the intent is to definitely modernize it, but I think it's important to still understand what made, without using too many general words, like what made the original great. But it's more like, if you can enhance it and surprise fans in ways that could make it interesting, then where does it stand now if it was releasing in this day and age, and hopefully giving the same kind of reaction to hopefully people who haven't played Croc before, to basically be like, this feels just as like grabbing in terms of like, where is it going to take you as at least as an atmosphere, as a theme. So there's more new elements added to it, more stuff that's like more common in like modern electronic music genres that exist these days, without like taking away from why this was nice, that it was simple and cool in the way that it has been done. So hopefully with how I went about it, it doesn't take away from what the original fans wanted. Because nostalgia is such a strong thing, it's really difficult to, appease people who grew up with it and now they're back to it and they hear like a new version of it. Is that you don't want to take away from what they love from the original. And hopefully I've done a good job. But again, I am like the nostalgic fans of the game. I want this to be something that people get to discover again, or discover for the first time, and love what the remix stands for as a theme.
And I think part of your intent in the remix too is recapturing that feeling that we don't have a lot anymore now that culture is so immediately on demand, which is that feeling that any gamer has had who's played older games, is sitting on a title screen and just staying on it and listening to the music over and over and over again, because there's no other way to do that. There is no YouTube at the time. There is no Spotify at the time. And just being able to vibe out to this track, because on the one screen that would allow you to do that.
Mm-hmm. With nostalgia, with or without it, like admit that there are parts of Croc that did feel really interesting in terms of how it engaged with you atmospherically. So for example, I remember really liking the cave levels because of how rarely does a game know how to make you feel so like this kind of like sense of wonder with how it accomplishes different stuff, like the fact that the reverb of the PlayStation did a really good job of making the cave feel like a cave that you get to explore in, and then you have like the fog, the you know, like how the PlayStation can render some distance, so it says okay, now there's a fog in there. So all these different elements help these kind of levels make you really feel like you're there despite the limitations of what it was and how it came to be. So I think like in terms of modernizing stuff, it's like the game already had really good foundations, and now you just get to show people that the fundamentals themselves don't need to change. What it needs to, what can change now is a modern game is the graphics, the sound, the way the game like plays in some capacity. I'm sure that there's people who would love more accessibility in some retrospect. You know, these are all things that you just, you know, if you had the potential to look back and say things are working great and let's leave it the way they are, versus, you know, the improvements you can make now because of modern game development. I think that's like a really cool thing. And to tie it a bit to the approach to the remix, it's the same thing. There's fundamentals that really work for the theme that I wanted to keep the way it is. And there's parts of it that I knew that if that was there or this was there, it would have made it a more interesting theme. But in no way the intent is to replace all of it or to say that this is now a different genre. The intent is, I like the fundamentals of it because it is a really good theme song, and let's lift it up because it can be very interesting if it's made now.
I think in a lot of ways, the challenge of a remake and a remaster, and to the same degree, a challenge of you remixing the theme, is to try and make the modern version true to not what the old version was, but to what the old version feels like when you remember it. I think about that with movies a lot, where there will be a movie that I loved as a teenager, and revisiting it unchanged from when I was a teenager, I think, oh no, that's not the thing that I remember liking so much. And I think that is, you know, that is the most interesting thing about a remake, is being true to the spirit of something more than being true to the exact technical specificity of everything that it was.
Right. It's like saying that because there were like, because sure, movies, because again, movies done back in the day had like technical limitations. You couldn't like do this or that. So to assume that because technical limitations are the reason the movie is bad is to ignore what the movie it was about when it comes to its very core of it being something that you grew up with and loved. Because it's like, because anything can just look better because you can improve it technically, but you need to always rely on this was special for a reason, regardless of how it made you feel at the time. And I'm sure that, like, you know, the example of characters made on the PlayStation that had way fewer polygons, it's like that didn't really matter. The game was good, and if improving it technically doesn't necessarily improve the game, then you're kind of missing the point of why it was a good game.
And you're already, to a degree, you're remastering it in your head when you remember it, using the most sophisticated rendering engine that exists.
Exactly, yeah.
What's so exciting about a remake is that you can approach people who have fond memories of the original, but you can also approach people for whom the original came out long before they were playing games and is the exact type of game that is completely up their alley. And there are literally billions more active gamers now than there were when Croc came out.
Oh, 100%. And a lot of gamers who, and I feel actually that's something that I'm realizing in the landscape, is that it's not always easy to find games that are in this kind of like, you know, I guess you could say cutesy caliber, because it's not often an easy game to produce these days. And I think this has to do with the factor of nostalgia and the PlayStation games, like having less to work with and imagine stuff around it. We both grew up with the game back when we were just, you know, 8 years old, I guess. And so the fact that I know, as someone who is in my current age, I would love to play more games like that. I think it's not just the nostalgia of it. There is something legitimately fun with how the mechanics work, and the way it still feels like, even though it existed back then, that doesn't mean that there's still games that feel this way and act this way because of it. Because people are always trying to make themselves like, different in that space. I feel like this existing still now would in and of itself feel like this is still new because of how this hasn't been tackled in the exact way because of the character design, gameplay, the world building. I think there's a lot of aspects to it that are just, it could never be properly replicated because you can never, again, you cannot just copy it. There's something very special to it.
Absolutely. And even though games now are a lot more densely featured and have a very different standard of UI and UX and graphics, great game design is timeless.
In the end of the day, it's really cool to be involved in something that's, given how I grew up with this game, not knowing what this game was going to be when I grew up with it, because you get the CD and you don't know what's going to happen once you press the power button on the PlayStation, and then the game starts, and then the game slowly introduces you to its world, and you start to realize like that the game's way of pacing you through what this is and making you comfortable, and all the characters in it like are very much there to make you feel like you are a fish out of water character. Like Croc is not someone who belongs there inherently, and he slowly gets to be introduced to the world of it, going to different places, collecting gems. So even if it's like a lot of the staples of like what platformers are usually, the fact that the game just knew how to make you feel like a fish out of water character. Like you're much like the player, like just insert the CD and start to play it. You, the player, and Croc are basically starting from square one. You have no idea where you are, let alone why are you even a dinosaur who is jumping over things and collecting gems. But that doesn't matter. Like the idea is that you're not left out as a player to feel like you're in this world for the first time, like Croc is.